Let's talk more about what this report means with Gadi Adelman. Gadi is a counterterrorism expert. Gadi, as we just reported, Iran is active in Africa. What do you make of this development that Iran is sponsoring terror in Africa now?
Well, we've actually discussed this on the show before, and it doesn't come as a surprise because this has actually been going on for years. Since the establishment in 1979 of the Islamic Republic of Iran, they have made enormous efforts to export their revolution around the world. And they do this through the Islamic Revolutionary Guard, Iranian diplomats, and other sub-organizations that they have. And as I said, this has been going on as far back in my notes here as 2010, when the Nigerian authorities seized a huge Iranian weapons shipment, which was shipping rocket launchers and heavy mortars to Hamas. So we know this has been going on. It's really not too much of a surprise.
So, Gadi, what is the response to this? Is it up to the governments of Chad and Sudan and Eritrea to now try and step up and tackle this? Or does this essentially somehow become Israel and perhaps America's problem now?
Well, both. Obviously, the different countries in Africa where Iran is attempting to get a foothold, those countries are fighting back. We saw it in 2013 in the Nigerian city of Kano, and we've seen it in Kenya. And like your report said, this really is focused on Israel. And we have to remember, I believe it was last week, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu met with the leaders of Chad. So every time he goes to a different country and starts to make any kind of diplomatic relations, you're going to find Iran trying to go the other way.
Gadi, Al-Qaeda, Al-Shabaab, and Boko Haram, terrorist groups that also operate in Africa, these are Sunni Islamic terrorist groups. Do you foresee clashes between them and Iran's Shiite-sponsored terrorists?
Well, they've been trying to push the Shiite movement throughout Africa. And they have the Al-Mustafa International University, which is Iran's foremost religious institution. It was established in 2007. They are now in 17 different sub-Saharan African areas. They run schools, mosques, seminaries. So they're trying to push this out there. Hopefully, they don't want that, obviously. They'd rather make these different countries their allies, have diplomatic relations. And remember, this all boils back down to Israel. So they'd like to use them and go so far as to use them in the United Nations and the UN Security Council.
Gadi, we also know that Iran has terror cells in Latin America. Exactly how big is Iran's global presence?
Again, we've talked about this before. They are throughout the world. And this is why every time Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says that Iran is the biggest threat to Israel, and it just amazes me that people laugh at that, they have no concept of how large and how far the reach is. I mean, we know they're in Syria. We know they're in Iraq. We know that they're in Lebanon with Hezbollah. But they are also in Yemen. And now we start to see all these other African countries. They are trying to get a foothold anywhere they can. And we have to remember, they refer to the United States as the big Satan, but they call Israel the little Satan.
Gadi, you're mentioning Yemen, the Houthis there, Hezbollah in Latin America and other parts of the Middle East, Islamic Jihad, this terror organization now in Africa. How is Iran funding all of these proxy terror groups?
Wow, that is a wonderful question, but you have to remember a big portion of their money comes from the drug trade. And again, I've spoken about this before, I believe, on your show. Hezbollah, in all the different countries where they're located, they utilize the drug smuggling and the drug trade to obtain a big portion, the bulk of the money that they utilize for this.
So, Gadi, very quickly, the aims of the U.S. sanctions is to deprive Iran of the funds to support these terror groups. I understand what you're saying, that they're also relying on independent drug cartels. But does it seem like these sanctions are working in terms of curtailing this kind of activity?
They are working to a certain extent. And it goes back to 2013 when the U.S. Treasury sanctioned Hezbollah in West Africa. So, right there again, we already had Africa as far back as 2013. But also in 2017, it was reported in the United States of a project called Project Cassandra, which was launched by the US DEA, the Drug Enforcement Agency. And that was to combat Hezbollah's billion-dollar narcotic and money laundering enterprise around the world.
All right, Gadi, thank you so much as always. We appreciate your analysis there, and it's a problem that we continue to focus on. Iran's a growing influence on terror around the world.